My name is Catherine Merrill, and I want to start by saying that I never imagined I would be the kind of woman who walked away from a 4-year relationship 3 months before her wedding. I had the dress. I had the venue. I had the monogrammed napkins sitting in a box in my spare bedroom, tissue paper still folded neatly around each one, like they were something precious. And then, on a Tuesday evening in early October, while I was reheating leftover pasta and half watching a home renovation show, my fiancée Sabrina Holt sat down across from me at our kitchen table and told me she needed a break to explore herself. I remember the way the overhead light caught the engagement ring on her finger, a round-cut diamond set in rose gold that I had spent 4 months saving for. I remember thinking, in that first split second before the words fully landed, that she looked beautiful and nervous and very far away from me, even though she was sitting close enough that I could have reached out and touched her hand. I didn't reach out. I put my fork down slowly on the edge of my bowl, and I asked her to say it again. She said it again. Sabrina and I had met at a friend's birthday party in Chicago 6 years before all of this. She was standing near the window of a rooftop bar with a glass of white wine in her hand and this effortless, unhurried confidence that made everyone else in the room seem slightly louder and less interesting by comparison. A mutual friend, Jade Calloway, introduced us, and within 20 minutes we had moved away from the group and were talking the way you only talk to certain people, like the conversation had already been going on for years, and we were just picking it back up. I remember thinking on the drive home that night that I had never met anyone who made me feel so immediately understood. I called my sister Nora the next morning and told her I'd met someone worth paying attention to. We dated for 2 years before moving in together. The apartment was a 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park with original hardwood floors and a clawfoot tub that Sabrina immediately claimed as her primary creative space, meaning she would light candles around it and soak for an hour every Sunday while listening to podcasts about psychology and design. I loved that about her. I loved a lot of things about her. I loved the way she organized her bookshelf by color, even though it drove her slightly mad when she couldn't find something quickly. I loved the way she made breakfast like it was a project, always experimenting with something new, always sliding a plate across the counter to me with this expression that was equal parts hopeful and amused. I loved the way she said my name when she was happy to see me, with this slight lift at the end like it was something she was glad to say. We got engaged on a Saturday in March, 2 years after moving in together. I proposed on the same rooftop bar where we'd first met, closed for a private event I had spent 3 weeks coordinating with Jade and the owner, a man named Pete Sorrento, who was incredibly accommodating and only slightly suspicious about whether I was planning something legal. Sabrina cried. I cried. Jade cried from behind the potted ficus, where she had been crouching with her phone to capture the moment. We got engaged, and it felt exactly like it was supposed to feel, like a door opening rather than closing, like the beginning of the actual life I had been building toward. The year between the engagement and that Tuesday night in October was, by every reasonable measure, a good year. We were planning a wedding. We were looking at houses in Evanston because Sabrina wanted more space, and I was ready to plant something somewhere permanently. We had a shared spreadsheet for vendors and a running Pinterest board, and a florist named Rosa Cantu who smelled like eucalyptus and had very strong opinions about peonies. We went to 3 tastings. We argued pleasantly about whether to do a DJ or a band. Sabrina wanted live music. I wanted the flexibility of a playlist. We compromised on a band for the ceremony and a DJ for the reception, and felt very proud of ourselves for being the kind of couple who could compromise. If there were signs, I've spent a considerable amount of time since that Tuesday trying to decide whether I actually miss them or whether I'm just doing the thing people do after a relationship ends, which is to build a retrospective case for inevitability. Because it always feels more manageable when you can point to a moment and say, there, that's where it started. It feels less arbitrary. It feels like something you could have caught if only you'd been paying closer attention. The honest answer is that Sabrina had been quieter in the 2 or 3 months before she sat down across from me at that kitchen table. She had started going to a therapist named Dr. Waverly, which I fully supported, but she was increasingly cagey about what they talked about, which was her right, but which also meant that I could feel her processing something significant without knowing what it was. She had started spending more evenings reading alone in the bedroom. She had canceled on plans with our shared friends twice in a row, including a dinner with my coworker Michael Tran and his wife Lynn that she'd originally been enthusiastic about. She seemed, in the most precise word I can find, like someone who had turned down the volume on herself. Not unhappy exactly, just turned down. I asked her about it once, maybe 6 weeks before the conversation happened. We were in bed, and the apartment was quiet, and I asked her if everything was okay, and she said yes, and then said she'd just been doing a lot of thinking. I asked what about, and she said, just things, and then she kissed me on the forehead and turned off her lamp, and I lay in the dark for longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling and telling myself that everyone goes through quiet periods and that the healthiest thing I could do was give her room.
I ga her room.
And then she sat across from me on a Tuesday evening and told me she needed a break to explore herself. The conversation that followed was one of the strangest I have ever had in my life. Not because it was loud. It was, in fact, extremely quiet. Sabrina spoke carefully, like she had rehearsed it, and maybe Dr. Waverly had helped her find the words, and I sat there and listened and felt something very cold and very steady settle over me like a second skin. She said she loved me. She said she wasn't sure she was ready for marriage. She said she felt like she had been moving along a track for so long that she wasn't certain anymore whether the destination was one she'd actually chosen or one she'd simply agreed to. She said she needed time. She said she needed space to figure out who she was outside of us. I asked her what that meant in practical terms. She hesitated. She said she thought we should take a few weeks apart. She said maybe I could stay with my sister Nora while she figured things out. She said she wasn't ending the engagement, she was just asking for a pause. I looked at her for a long time. I looked at the ring on her finger, and then I looked at her face, and I thought about the spreadsheet with the vendors on it, and the monogram napkins in the spare bedroom, and Rosa Cantu, and her strong opinions about peonies. I thought about the rooftop bar, and Jade crouching behind the ficus with her phone. I thought about 4 years of Sunday morning breakfasts, and the clawfoot tub, and the bookshelf organized by color. I thought about all of it very quickly, the way you think about things when something is ending, all at once and out of order. And then I said, very calmly, that I didn't think a pause was something I was able to do. Sabrina looked surprised. I think she had expected me to say yes. I think she had prepared for negotiation, for tears, for me to ask how long, and then reluctantly agree. What she had not prepared for was the version of me that had, somewhere in the 60 seconds between her asking and me answering, understood that I was not willing to sit in someone's guest bedroom waiting to find out whether my fiancé was going to come back and decide she wanted to marry me after all. I told her that I understood she was going through something real, and I told her that I wasn't dismissing that. But I also told her that a break in this context wasn't a pause on the wedding planning. A break 3 months before our wedding while she explored herself was a break on our relationship, and if she needed that, then I thought we needed to have an honest conversation about what that actually meant for us, not dress it up as something temporary and manageable. Sabrina started to cry. She said I was being rigid. She said she wasn't asking for much, just a few weeks. She said she loved me, and that wasn't in question. I said that I believed she loved me. I also said that love wasn't the only thing that mattered here. What mattered was whether she wanted to marry me, and if she wasn't sure about that, then I needed to know that now rather than after we'd signed a lease on a house in Evanston and sent 200 wedding invitations to people we both knew. The conversation lasted a long time after that. It circled back on itself several times in the way conversations do when both people are trying to say something true and both people are frightened of what the truth is going to cost them. Sabrina said she did want to marry me. She just wanted to be sure. I asked her how a few weeks apart was going to make her sure. She didn't have a clear answer to that. I asked her if there was something else going on, someone else, and she said no, and I believed her, and I believe her still. This wasn't about another person. It was about Sabrina, and a version of her life she needed to examine, and I respected that in principle even as my chest felt like it was slowly filling with cold water. By the end of that night, I had taken off my engagement ring and set it on the kitchen counter between us. Sabrina stared at it like I had said something in a language she didn't speak. I told her I wasn't trying to be punishing. I told her I wasn't angry, and that was true, or at least it was true in that moment. The anger came later. I told her that I loved her enough to be honest with her, which meant being honest with myself, and I could not be an option while she figured out her life. I would not be the ring left on the counter that she came back to when she had made her peace with everything else. I deserved to be a choice that someone made with their whole heart, not a consolation destination at the end of a journey of self-discovery. She tried to give the ring back to me. I told her to keep it for now, that we could figure out the logistics later when things were calmer. I called my sister Nora that night from the parking garage of our building, sitting in my car with the engine off, and I cried in a way I had not cried since our mother passed away 3 years earlier. Nora stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. She didn't try to tell me what to do, or what it meant, or whether I had done the right thing. She just stayed on the line and said my name every few minutes to remind me she was there, and it was one of the most sustaining acts of love I have ever received from another person. I stayed with Nora for 2 weeks. She lived in Wicker Park with her husband Dan Reeves and their 7-year-old daughter Harper, and they put me in the guest room with the yellow curtains and fed me things and let me be quiet when I needed to be quiet and talk to me when I needed to talk. Dan, who is not a particularly sentimental man, stopped by the guest room on my second night there and sat on the edge of the bed and said that anyone who couldn't see what they had in me was not paying the right kind of attention. He said it gruffly and then stood up and left before I could cry at him, and I have never loved my brother-in-law more than Sabrina texted me several times during those 2 weeks. She said she missed me. She said the apartment felt wrong. She said she had been thinking and talking to Dr. Waverly, and she wanted to see me. I answered her texts, but I kept them short, not out of cruelty, but because I was genuinely not in a place where I could have a productive conversation. I was in the stage of grief that sits right before the anger, that soft and bewildered place where you keep waking up expecting the world to have rearranged itself back into the shape it was supposed to be. My coworker Michael Tran found out what had happened through the office grapevine and took me to lunch at a Vietnamese place near our office building on Michigan Avenue. He ordered for both of us without asking and then sat back and said, "So what actually happened?" And I told him the whole thing. Michael is the kind of person who listens without any visible agenda, without formulating his response while you're still talking, and by the time I was done I felt lighter than I had in 2 weeks. He said that what I had done sounded incredibly hard and incredibly right, and sometimes those two things went together more often than people wanted to admit. Then he ordered us both Vietnamese iced coffees, and we talked about something completely unrelated for the rest of lunch, and it was exactly what I needed. The anger came in week 3. I was back in the apartment by then, Sabrina having moved temporarily into her friend Priya Nair's place in Bucktown, and I was surrounded by all the physical evidence of the life we had been building, the shared bookshelf, the cookbooks she had annotated in pencil, the framed photo from our engagement party that Jade had printed and given us in a rose gold frame. The anger was not the explosive kind. It was quieter than that and in some ways harder to manage because of it. It was the kind of anger that sits in your stomach and makes everything taste slightly flat. I was angry that she had waited until 3 months before the wedding. I was angry that the conversation had happened on a random Tuesday evening like it was a scheduling conflict and not the dismantling of the future I had been planning. I was angry that she had said she wasn't ending the engagement while also clearly in the process of ending the engagement, and that the gap between those two things had been left for me to navigate alone. I called a therapist of my own. Her name was Dr. Sandra Okafor, and she had an office in the West Loop with very comfortable chairs and a white noise machine outside the door, and I saw her every Thursday for the next 3 months. She helped me understand something I had been circling without landing on, which was that the thing that hurt most was not the break itself, but the way it had been framed. Asking for a break to explore herself positioned my presence in her life as the obstacle. As though the problem she needed to solve was me, was us, was the commitment she had made. And that framing was something I hadn't been able to name until Dr. Okafor gave me the space to name it. I did not go back to Sabrina. She reached out again about 5 weeks after we separated, a real call this time, not a text. She said she'd done a lot of work with Dr. Waverly, and she believed now that she had been scared, not uncertain. She said she believed she had let fear masquerade as a need for freedom, and that what she'd actually been afraid of was the permanence of being truly known by someone. She said she wanted to try again. She said she had never stopped wanting to marry me. I listened to all of it. I listened carefully, and I believed her, or I believed that she believed it, which might not be the same thing but was close enough. And then I said something that surprised even me, which was that I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. Not because I didn't love her, I did, I think part of me always will, but because something had shifted in me during those weeks that couldn't be entirely unshifted. I had looked very clearly at the question of what I was willing to accept and what I was not, and I had found an answer in myself that was cleaner and more certain than almost any answer I had found before. I was not willing to spend my life with someone who, when things got hard and uncertain, would look at me and ask for a break. Marriage is not a track you can pause when the destination starts to feel real. It is a choice you make every day, and I needed to be with someone who understood that. We stayed on the phone for a long time. It didn't end badly. We said kind things. We said true things. I told her I hoped she did the work she needed to do, and I meant it without any edge. She said she was sorry, and I said I knew she was, and I believed that too. When we hung up, I sat on my living room floor for a while and just breathed, the way Dr. Okafor had taught me, slow and deliberate, until the weight of it settled into something I could carry. I canceled the vendors over the following 2 weeks. Rosa Cantu was surprisingly gracious about it. The DJ was less so. The venue refunded 60% of our deposit, which was more than I had expected and less than I had hoped for. I kept the monogrammed napkins in the spare bedroom for longer than made any rational sense, and then one afternoon I put them in a donation box and drove them to a Goodwill on Ashland Avenue and sat in the parking lot for a minute after ID dropped them off and felt, beneath everything else, a small and tentative sense of relief. The year after all of this was not a linear recovery. Anyone who tells you that healing moves in one direction hasn't done very much of it. There were evenings that were genuinely fine, and evenings that were not fine at all. There were moments in the middle of ordinary days, in the cereal aisle at the grocery store, in the elevator at work, in the parking garage of our building where I had cried in my car that first night, when the grief would rise without warning, and I would have to just stand in it until it passed. Dr. Okafor told me that was normal. Nora told me that was normal. My friend Jade Calloway, who had been deeply loyal throughout all of it, told me that was normal, and then took me to a rooftop bar that was definitively not the one where Sabrina and I had gotten engaged, and made me drink a very good cocktail and talk about something other than my feelings for 2 consecutive hours. I am writing this now from my own apartment, a 1-bedroom in Ravenswood that I found 8 months after Sabrina and I separated. It has no clawfoot tub and the hardwood floors are less impressive than the ones in Lincoln Park, but there is a bay window in the living room that gets extraordinary morning light, and I have filled the sill with plants that are, against all reasonable expectation, thriving. I have a bookshelf organized by author last name, which is objectively the correct system, and a kitchen I have slowly learned to cook in not as a project, but just as an act of taking care of myself. I am not entirely healed. I'm not sure that's a destination with a fixed arrival date. But I am something that feels more solid than I was a year ago, more located in myself, more certain of what I am looking for and what I will not settle for. I went on 3 dates in the past 6 months. One was awkward, one was pleasant but unmemorable, and one was with a woman named Elise Navarro who works in urban planning and laughs at things I didn't expect her to find funny, and who asked me on a second date in a way that was so direct and unambiguous that I nearly cried on the spot, which I managed to contain until I got home. We have been seeing each other for 2 months. It is early, and I am not racing anywhere, and that itself feels like something I earned. I don't regret ending my engagement. I want to say that clearly, not as a performance of strength, but as a genuine statement of where I have arrived after a year of honest reckoning. I regret the circumstances. I regret that something I had built so carefully and loved so much came apart the way it did. But I do not regret choosing myself in that kitchen on a Tuesday evening in October. I do not regret taking off the ring before she asked me to. I do not regret knowing, at 34 years old, in a way I did not entirely know before, what I need from a person who says they love me. You do not get to ask someone to wait while you decide if they're worth choosing. Not 3 months before the wedding. Not ever. That is not a pause. That is an answer. And the kindest thing I ever did for both of us was treat it like one.